Salute, discipulaque. Today we'll talk about a certain kind of pronoun known as reflexive pronouns. Here's where these reflexive pronouns come into play. Normally, subjects and direct objects, or actually other kinds of objects, possessives, indirect objects, objects of prepositions. So normally subjects and those other things in the sentence are separate people or things. But we're using the direct object as an obvious example. Like if we say Julia sees the poet, Julia is the subject, the poet's the direct object. They're totally different people. Notice in our Latin sentence, Julia is nominative, poetam is accusative. And of course, we can use a pronoun in the place of the direct object. If the poet is, instead of saying Julia sees the poet, if we already know that the poet's there or who he is, if we know that he's the poet Ovid, Julia eam videt. Julia sees him. All right. Now, and it is the usual third person singular pronoun. Depending on context, if we want to say this poet, we can say hunk that, we can say illum. Those can also take the place of him, although am is kind of our default. Plural, eos, hos, illos. If I want to say Julia sees me, just the accusative of the first person pronoun, me, or notice if it's plural, Julia sees you, Julia te videt. Simple enough. But let us suppose that the subject is the same person as the direct object or some other part of the sentence. Like we want to say Julia sees herself. Well, notice what we did in English. In English, in a situation like this, we always use a pronoun ending in self when the subject acts upon itself. In other words, when we have the same person or thing as the subject who also plays another grammatical part in the sentence. We call these reflexive pronouns. Notice the ones we have in English. They all end in self, himself, herself, itself. Myself, yourself are the first and second person pronouns. The third person plural, themselves, or ourselves, or yourselves, the various plurals. Right? Always end in self or self. Now in Latin, it's a little simpler, at least for the first and second person. We just use the same pronoun forms we used when it's not reflexive. The accusative of me, right? I remember it was Julia me videt, Julia sees me. If I'm the subject, me is the same. I see myself. It's like saying I see me. I see me. There's no separate word for myself. We see ourselves. We see us. Nos videmus. Or you see yourself. And you could probably actually leave the nominative pronoun out and just say te vides, but tu te vides. You see te. You see yourself. So that's how this works in Latin. Now, third person, that's where we have a separate pronoun. Latin does use a separate reflexive pronoun for the third person only. The good news is there's no nominative, which we'll talk about the reason for that in a minute. And the singular and plural forms are the same, which means you only have 4 forms you need to remember here, which is nice, isn't it? No nominative, and starting with the genitive, sui, sibi, say. And whether it's himself, or themselves, same form. Notice it's very similar to the second and the first person pronouns. Remember the second person, tu, tui, tibi, te. First person was ego, mei, mihi, me. So it's kind of follows the same pattern. Sui, sibi, say. That's our reflexive.